So leaders, it doesn't matter what learning or development you engage in, they are premised on control. Controlling time, controlling space, controlling people, controlling resources, controlling the wider financial issues. They're all about the kind of management of control. But we know increasingly that that's not serving leaders well, because leaders have to work across boundaries. They have to work in different spheres. They cannot exercise all their effectiveness in a sphere of control. They have to find ways in which they can influence well beyond that sphere. Now, within lots of models, they suggest there are 3 circles of authority that leaders need to be effective in. Indeed, they need to be effective in that kind of epicenter of authority where it's necessary for them to exercise the level of control that's required to make sure that organizations perform effectively. But outside of that, often they have to work within their specific sector or their specific community. So they have to work across the housing sector, they have to work across a health sector. And the skills that they require for that are very much different. But often they use those skills that are associated with control to manage the way they lead in those other sectors. So recently, I'll give you an example without naming names. I was talking to a group of leaders about their engagement with local service boards, that some of you may be aware of, which are beginning to emerge locally. And I talked through these different models of control and the need for leaders to move beyond this sense of, to expand their sense of influence, personal influence and authority beyond their sphere of control. And they were very comfortable around this. They thought it was completely logical. And then one of the leaders said, well, I think that's completely great, but what really annoys me is they held the meeting at a time when I couldn't make it. And that says to me that that leader was saying, I need to control time. It is my right to control time when these things occur. But it is not that person's right to control time. The more we move outside of those boundaries where we have to engage different communities, we lose that sense of control. But we still have to be effective in those spheres. And creating new forms of leadership that are much more influential, that are less premised on systems or models of control, will be the way forward in the future. It's going to be the way in which we develop a wider public service community. It's the way in which services will flow from housing into health, into education, into local government, as indeed the citizen would want them to be. Narrative leadership is very much about engagement, and narrative leadership essentially is about storytelling. It's about using the power and ritual of story to be able to bring others into the fold. It's about using story as a technology, a communication technology, to ensure that what we can do is always engage others in processes of change. Stories are deeply powerful as a device for engaging others. They pull people into a room. They enable people to think about a different way of looking at the world, a different scenario, a different outcome. There's a general theory that there have only ever been 6 stories ever told during the history of the human race. And that what we do is we change the context and the people's names and the histories around those stories. But fundamentally, we are still telling the same stories we've always told, ever since we could communicate. Stories are deeply powerful. And I would suggest in a Celtic nation that is platformed on storytelling, they're even more powerful for us. So never underestimate the power of story. And as a leader, often we can relate to those notions of story. I remember all the things that I've learned, and bearing in mind that 80% of our learning takes place in a social environment. It doesn't take place in a taught, fixed environment. It takes place in the social environment. Storytelling is a mechanism for ensuring that we learn, that we engage, that we understand there can be a different way of doing things. That we understand and appreciate other people's points of view and experience. Listening to someone's story often is a profoundly effective way of getting in touch with where other people are inside a situation, and we don't do it enough. Thought leadership is very much about recognizing that anyone who works inside the public service these days will realize that the big currency inside public service is the span of attention that we can give to a particular issue. That often there is so much complexity whizzing around and so much busyness inside organizations, being able to give the amount of attention we would want to a particular issue Or more importantly, being able to ensure that other people can give the amount of attention we would need them to do to a particular issue is an immensely tall order for us. And thought leadership is about recognizing that what we have to do is we have to find ways where we convey our thoughts that actually create an outcome in terms of changing people's behavior and actions. And sometimes you can see this in a meeting. If you're in a meeting, someone will kind of bring in a thought, bring in a new idea. And there'll be all kinds of things that will happen around that new idea. It doesn't matter that people will move that idea on. Often what we play, and I don't know whether you do, but I've seen it in lots of meetings, we play word association. So someone will come in with a new idea, and someone else then will come in with the same idea, just using different language. And someone else will then reinterpret that idea in a different way. So often we get lots of what I call conceptual association and word association, without necessarily delivering the idea. And then often we get in meetings, someone will come forward with an idea, and somebody will say, oh yeah, well that's all very well, but... And what we will do is we will diminish the idea, or the value idea. We will take it apart. Rather than enrich it, we tend to find there's easier ways in which we can kind of diminish the idea and its value. We have to find ways in which we as individuals, and you as leaders, can thought lead inside environments in which people have no allegiance to what you're saying or what you believe. You cannot rely upon a natural sense of allegiance. You have to use other skills to be able to get people to do the things that you need to do. You have to enlighten people with your ideas and your views so that they follow instinctively the kinds of things that you want them to take forward.